Alright, so I'm going to be reading my allegory, which turned out to be a bit lengthy, so I apologize. And I also apologize if I pause in between, because reading out loud is not one of my favorite things to do. But here goes nothing. I am fulfilled, a Christian allegory. Go and fulfill what you have been chosen to do, Shiloh. The gratifier will fill you with all it is that you need. Do not be afraid of what lies ahead, and do not question what it is he tells your heart, her grandmother had said, her voice weakened by her years, but her words stronger than ever. Then she had kissed her granddaughter's temple and smiled at her, making her aged skin wrinkle further around her rich green eyes. Your mother and father, they would be proud, my darling. Remember that they are with you. They died fighting for what you must now fight in your own way. Go, and help the world fill the void that it searches to fill. She took a strand of Shiloh's red hair that had escaped from her braid and tucked it back behind her ear. You can do that, can't you? You are strong? She had asked. Shiloh had shaken her head, a small grin on her face. I am not strong on my own. I am strong only because I have been fulfilled. Her grandmother smiled. Good, remember that. And more important, remember that there are others who crave what it is you have found, though they do not know what they are missing. Shiloh remembered the conversation she had had with her grandmother just days ago, before she had arrived at the house she stayed in now. She watched from a doorway in that house as her new companion, Nimshi, continued about the odd actions she was performing in the bedroom they shared, unaware that Shiloh was watching. Nimshi knelt at her bedside, much in the manner that Shiloh occasionally did with her grandmother when they thanked the gratifier for his blessings. She thought for a moment, with a small flutter of hope, that perhaps Nimshi was doing the same. She watched, waiting to hear what it is she would speak. She felt a bit guilty for watching the other girl so secretively, but she could not think to pry herself away. Nimshi reached for something under her bed, and as she did so, Shiloh caught a glimpse of a tear upon the girl's dark cheek. Her hands moved a bit unsteadily, but yet the action she performed seemed to be routine. Shiloh watched with growing concern as Nimshi pulled out a thin rope and began twisting it about her thin wrist as if she were imprisoning herself. I am poor, I am helpless, I am not happy, Nimshi began to say, her voice steady and almost matter-of-fact. I am sad. Her voice wavered slightly. I am sad because of those things, but this is who I am. I will never become someone of importance, and I will die unknown, but this is who I must be. Another tear slid down the girl's face, and she reached beneath her bed again, and this time pulled out a small box. From within the box she produced an object that glinted against the small amount of sun coming through the bedroom window. Shiloh's eyes widened as she realized what the object was inside the girl's hand. The excess rope dangling between her wrists, Nimshi began rolling up one of her long sleeves, revealing a series of red marks along her forearm. Some had scarred, and others looked as if they'd been made recently. She brought the knife up to her skin, and Shiloh could stand still no longer. Wait, why are you doing that? What are you doing? She stepped into the room and Nimshi jumped, the knife nicking her skin in the process. A small stream of blood dripped down her forearm as she turned to look at Shiloh in confusion. What do you mean? Nimshi asked as she dabbed at the blood with the underside of her skirt. Shiloh hesitated, unsure what it was she wanted to ask. Why are you hurting yourself, and why were you saying all those things? Those horrible things. Because it's how I feel. Nimshi raised a dark brow at the girl in her room. I mean, don't you? She stood up and quickly but gently took the other girl's arm and pushed her up her sleeve, revealing Shiloh's pale, soft, unmarked skin. Nimshi's eyes widened and she looked up at Shiloh. Where are your scars? I don't have any. At least, not any like yours. I don't understand. Why do you have them? Why would you do this to yourself? I've never seen anything like it. Nimshi crossed one arm over the other and studied her bare feet. It's what I've always done. My father says that we must embrace the feelings that we have inside, and that they'll guide us through life. The scars and the cuts, they are a symbol of those feelings, the ones of pain especially. They're who I am. My brothers and my father have them too. My father will wear his proudly, but I haven't begun to feel like I want to do that yet. So your family does this too? Nimshi nodded. Doesn't yours? Shiloh shook her head slowly. Oh, well, don't let my father or my brothers know. Why not? Just don't let them know, okay? If they know you don't embrace your feelings as we do, and that you don't follow our ways, he won't let you live here anymore. Or he may do worse. Just don't say anything. Shiloh swallowed and nodded. Nimshi turned and knelt by her bed again. She undid the rope and put the knife back into its box. Reaching into her skirt pocket, she pulled out something and put it alongside the knife before she closed the lid and put the objects back in their place. What was that? Shiloh asked her. My offering. Father says we must give our all to what it is we feel. And if we do that, and do our best to find what it is that makes us happy, we'll find fulfillment in life. Oh, I see. Nimshi stood once again and began making her way towards the door, the atmosphere in the room having begun to make her a bit uneasy. Shiloh heard her grandmother's words again. Remember that there are others who crave what it is you have found, though they do not know it is what they are missing. Nimshi? Shiloh spoke up as the girl began to leave. Yes? She turned back toward her, her hand lingering on the doorframe. What is it that makes you happy? Nimshi cast her dark eyes to the floor for a moment before looking back up at Shiloh. I don't know. Oh, so that then is why you seem so sad? Yes, sometimes it is. But I guess I don't know. It's the way life is, I suppose. I don't think it has to be that way. Did you ever think that maybe, just maybe, there's something more? Something different? Well, not really. Have you? Yes, I know there's something different, actually. Shiloh's heart pounded within her chest. Was this the opportunity she had been looking for? This is what her grandmother had spoken about. Someday, perhaps she will have the privilege of opening someone's eyes to what it is you have. She felt the urge to continue. She knew this is what her grandmother and her parents would want her to do. What they would say the gratifier would want. She was scared, though. What if Nimshi wouldn't listen? She thought of her parents. They had to have been scared, too, when they died as they did. How can you be sure? What is it that you know? Nimshi asked her, seeming to be both interested and a bit unsure. Shiloh began to speak, not sure what words she would use, but hoping they would be the right ones. I found something that makes me happy. It can make me happy, even when inside I'm still a bit sad. Nimshi looked at her with intrigue, with hope. Shiloh cleared her throat slightly. He is the gratifier. He? A boy, you mean? No, nothing like that. In fact, the gratifier isn't really quite human as we are. How can that be? Who is... Hey, Nimshi. A boy's voice came bounding up the stairs. The girls turned to the sound, and Shiloh hoped nothing of what she had begun to say had been heard. Nimshi looked past Shiloh to the doorway where her youngest brother stood. Yes, Amraphel? What is it? Father wants you to come downstairs. Something he wants you to do with the horses. Oh. All right, I'll be down in a moment. The boy nodded and turned to go back to the old set of stairs. Will you come with me? Nimshi asked. Come with you? Yes, to take care of the horses. Nimshi looked past Shiloh to make sure her brother was gone. She lowered her voice slightly. I want you to tell me more about this gratifier. Will you? Shiloh smiled slightly and answered in a whisper as Nimshi had. Yes, of course. Nimshi led Shiloh down the stairs and got the orders from her father, a very tall man with broad shoulders and rich dark skin, whose brown eyes were like burning amber as they looked at Shiloh with no particular contempt. Yet Shiloh felt as if he somehow knew what had occurred upstairs. Nimshi led Shiloh to the barn, where the few horses the family had were kept. The two stepped up before a plain-looking brown mare, and Nimshi retreated somewhere within the small barn, and returned pushing a wheelbarrow, in which was balanced 2 shovels. Here, she handed a shovel to Shiloh. Ever mucked out a stall before? Shiloh shook her head. Well, I've never heard anyone speak of the gratifier before, so I guess this might be something new for both of us. Shiloh chuckled and watched as Nimshi led the horse out of the stall and tied her reins to a post just beyond the entrance. If you don't want to help, you don't have to. No, I can help, Shiloh said as she began copying the movements of Nimshi as she scraped the waste from the stall floor into the shovel and dumped it inside the rickety wheelbarrow. So the gratifier, Shiloh began. He was sent by the Creator. Creator? Yeah, the Creator made the world and everything in it. Oh, Nimshi nodded, pausing for a moment. You know, I never really thought much about how the world got here. I just figured I was here, and that's all there needed to be to it. Shiloh nodded with understanding, continued. The gratifier was sent to give us everything we could ever want. Because of him, we don't have to suffer, and we can rely on him for everything we need. Nimshi looked at Shiloh with intrigue. So, what about our feelings, then? What are we supposed to do with them? Well, my grandmother always said that it's normal to have feelings, and that sometimes we have to feel. But our feelings don't have to control us. We can give what we feel to the gratifier, and he fulfills what it is we need. Nimshi was quiet for a moment. I need to be happy. Could the gratifier give me that? Well, yes, I suppose so. My grandmother says the gratifier can make us happy, even if what's around us makes us feel sad. Nimshi nodded. I'd like that. How does it work? Nimshi heaved a large load of waste into the wheelbarrow after she spoke. Well, Shiloh did the same. First, you have to believe that the Creator and the gratifier are real, I think. It doesn't work if you don't. I don't know. But it sounds like something better than what I have now. The gratifier doesn't leave scars, right? No, not at all. The gratifier is very loving and wants to be there for everyone, even those who don't deserve it. That's something my mother would say anyway. Good, because I don't deserve it. My grandmother always said that none of us do, because we all make mistakes. But the gratifier forgives them and helps us anyway. Shiloh felt good telling Nimshi what she could about how she believed, although she found it all difficult to explain to someone who had never heard anything of the sort before. Oh. Nimshi heaved the last of the muck into the stall into the wheelbarrow. That's really nice. Things grew quiet for a moment as Shiloh helped Nimshi wheel the heavy wheelbarrow around the fence beside the garden so that the boys could spread it for fertilizer later on. As they circled around the barn, scrunching up their noses at the smell, they unknowingly passed by young Amraphel crouched in the bushes, where he had hid when he heard the girls coming. As he was walking by the barn, he heard Shiloh speaking of strange things. He didn't know what a gratifier was, but it sounded interesting. He knew that his sister and the new girl in their house would be mad if they knew he'd been listening to them, so he decided he would ask one of the older boys. They were smarter than him, and maybe they would know. Later that night, while the girls sat on Nimshi's bed, further discussing each other's beliefs, Nimshi's oldest brother, Addiston, crept into their room, causing the girls to jump. So Amraphel was right, he said quietly as he approached them. Addiston, what are you? Nimshi whispered. Look, I don't know what all this is that this girl's been telling you, but it's dangerous, and you better start changing your conversations before the word gets to Father. And just how might word get to Father if you and Amberfell are the only ones who know? Nimshi asked with a sisterly tone in her voice. Unless you tell. Addiston raised a brown at his sister. Do you really trust Amberfell to keep his mouth shut? Especially on something as strange as this. And if a car gets word, there's no stopping him. He's always looking for a way to make himself more noticed to Father. Nimshi's eyes grew a bit wide, and she began to look concerned. Nimshi, you know what will happen if Father finds out about all this. He looked at his sister with seriousness. Shiloh looked back and forth between the two. What will happen? Addiston looked up at Shiloh. I'm not sure just what Father would do to you, seeing as you're not actually family. He might send you off, which would be merciful compared to what he'd do to Nimshi, or any of us if he thought for 1 second we were believing any of the stories you're telling. It's just how he is. But they're not stories, Nimshi spoke up. So you believe her? Nimshi nodded. It's all very surprising, but something about it feels right. I think you should listen to her too, Addison. Look, Nimshi. As soon as Father finds out about it, it's not going to matter if it's right or not. You remember what happened to our mother. If he's willing to do that to his own wife, he'll do the same to his only daughter, too. He touched his sister's hand, and as he did, Shiloh caught a glimpse of the red lines marking up his forearm. He left the room with a bit of a sigh. Shiloh spotted a tear on Nimshi's face in the dim moonlight. Nimshi, what happened to your mother? Shiloh asked gently, her heart beat in her throat. She's dead. I never truly knew how, but I knew she left our beliefs, as what Father said. I was so young, and I was so caught up in what you were saying just now that I had forgotten. Ugh. I was so young, and I was so caught up in what you were saying that I had forgotten until just now. Shiloh, what if... Nimshi began to sob, and she looked at Shiloh with wild, fearful eyes. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I believe you, Shiloh. I believe in the gratifier, and I don't want to scar myself anymore. I'm scared. And I don't know why Father is so harsh, but I don't think there's any way to stop him. I want to believe, but Her sobs increased. Shiloh had no idea what to say. She'd never been in a situation like this, or she'd never seen a situation like this coming. She was glad Nimshi believed her, but Nimshi's mother had been killed. Would Nimshi die too? She couldn't believe someone would do that to their own daughter, but her grandmother had said before that sometimes people can be so cruel that it's beyond understanding. And it's all because they have no love in their hearts, or they love the things they shouldn't more than what they should. Their love is changed by the gratifier's enemy, the deceiver, and once they begin to follow him, it's a very hard road to get back. This much she knew, but what would her grandmother say now about Nimshi? Her mother and father had died in battle. Was it now time for her to lay down her life too? Or for Nimshi too? She didn't know, and she was scared, but yet she felt peace. Nimshi, Shiloh said quietly, I think we're going to be okay. I don't know how or why, but we'll be okay, no matter what happens. How? Nimshi asked, her voice soft and afraid. My parents died in battle, and my grandmother says they're someplace happy now. They believed too, so if you, or if we... Shiloh trailed off, finding it difficult to say aloud what was understood. So, if I die, I'll be happy. Yes, I believe so. I'm not scared to die then. Nimshi huddled closer to Shiloh, and Shiloh put her young arms around her friend. Thank you, Nimshi said softly. Whatever happens, I thank you. Shiloh nodded and leaned against Nimshi's head of short, tight curls. The girls remained together for tonight, eventually falling asleep beside each other. They were young and they were afraid, but they were ready. They were strong because the gratifier made them strong. Early the next morning, Addiston burst into the girls' room again. He began shaking the mattress that the two were curled up on. The girls awoke and met his wide eyes with equally worried stares. You better get out of here. I think a car knows now, and I don't trust him. I'd try, but there's nothing I can do. Just get out of here. Go. The girls began to sit up as Addiston rushed around the room, grabbing the girls' shoes and coats and handing them to him. But go where? Nimshi asked as she began pulling on her boots. I don't know. Anywhere, before Father catches you. I'm sure you'll find help somewhere. Just run and don't stop, okay? I don't know what it is you believe, but I see a change in you, and I don't want to lose you just because of that. Nimshi smiled solemnly. She knew Addiston had been older than the rest of them when Mother died. He knew more. She could see the fear and concern in his eyes. He looked at Shiloh. And you. He paused and exhaled. Just take care of her, okay? Shiloh nodded and finished pulling on her light coat. Adrenaline pulsated through her veins. She stood and grabbed her small bag of belongings that she kept beside her bed and turned towards the door. No, Addiston stopped them in the doorway. Father will see you this way. Go out the window. But we're upstairs. You can make it. There's a spot that's not too high up. Just be careful, and when you hit the ground, make your way towards the woods and don't stop to look back. Keep going until you can't go anymore. Nimshi embraced her brother, her arms wrapping about his waist. Her head only reached the center of his chest. He was tall like their father. Addiston gave her a squeeze and then pulled her away. Quickly, go. The girls nodded and headed out the window, their world spinning. Addiston watched them go, a lump in his throat as he knew not their fate. He turned and headed back down the stairs as casually as he could, unaware of what would await him. The girls slid off the old worn-out roof and landed harshly on the ground. Shiloh scraped her leg as she hit. Both girls stood back up and began to run. Addiston did his best to make sure no one discovered them missing for as long as he could. But before long, little Amberfell came so innocently down the stairs. Papa, Nimshi and Shiloh aren't in their rooms. Where are they at? Must have ran off, Akar mused, and Addiston looked at him with piercing eyes. And why would they have done that? The boy's father asked, his voice deep and harsh. I think I saw them heading out to the stables, Addiston attempted. Nimshi said something about an early morning ride. I heard Addiston in their room this morning. Amberfell. What's going on, boys? There's something one or all of you isn't telling me, and I intend to know what it is. Their father looked the three of them over with his dark, piercing stare. Akar smiled a bit. Amberfell, tell Papa what you heard in the stables the other day. Addiston's heart beat within his chest. He knew if he spoke up or tried to stop Amberfell, that his father would suspect him of helping them. I heard them telling stories about some guy called the Gratifier, and Shiloh said something about that we don't have to follow our feelings. Did she? Their father asked, crossing his thick, scarred arms. Addiston, what do you know of this? What is he talking about? I don't know. Just kids making up stories, I suppose. He swallowed. A car? Sounds suspicious to me. He leaned back in his chair and placed his feet on the table. I'd go ask Nimshi. She's a terrible liar. Their father narrowed his eyes and looked between them both. He patted Amberfell behind the head, urging him to go and stand among his brothers. He grunted slightly and left out of the house. Addiston shot Akar a look. What? You know what. I do as father would have me do. I go with my gut, and my gut tells me our sister is in big trouble. What's wrong with you? Me? Yes, you. How can you just throw your sister out to the dogs like that? She's been listening to false beliefs, Addiston. You know how father feels about things like that. So? You know what he did to Mother. Do you really want that to happen to Nimshi? She's our sister. Don't you care about her at all? Sure, but it's her own fault for disobeying father. I can't lie for her. Addiston let out a growl and turned away from his brother. What's gonna happen? Amberfell asked, his little eyes wide. Is Nimshi okay? No, she's not, Addiston told him, trying to soften his voice slightly. Because you told on her, Akar added. Akar, please, he's just a kid, he doesn't know. He knelt in front of his brother. I do wish you wouldn't always say everything you know, though. But it's not your fault, okay? Don't think it's your fault. You didn't know. Amberfell nodded with tears welling in his eyes. I'm sorry, he whimpered. Addiston nodded, holding back a few tears of his own. It was no longer up to him what became of his sister and the girl who had come to stay with them. Part of him wanted to go after his father, but he knew that would prove to be in vain. and perhaps his father would do away with him too. Then what? Amraphel would be left to be raised alongside a car, and what kind of man would he grow to be then? His mother had told him to take care of his brothers and his sister. He'd done his best to take care of his sister. He had to stay for his brothers, too. In the woods, the girls ran as hard and as fast as their legs would carry them, hoping no one was following them and that they hadn't been seen. They wondered what would become of Addiston, what would become of them, but mostly they focused on what they had been told to do. Keep going until you can't go anymore. Nimshi's father, whose name was Agro, made his way out to the stables. When he found no one there and saw that no horses were gone, he became suspicious. He looked back towards the house and saw that Nimshi's bedroom window was open. He gritted his teeth and mounted one of the horses. He was furious, and his rage led him on. He was going to find her. He kicked his horse's side swiftly, and the horse took off into the woods, its eyes nearly as wild as its master's. The boys waited in the kitchen. Addiston worried, a car hummed, and Amraphel cried. The girls ran, both breathing hard. Their sides began to cramp, but they pressed on. Occasionally they stumbled over a fallen branch or a rift in the ground, but they always steadied themselves. They didn't know how far they would need to run, but they knew it must be as far as they could until they found help. Where that would be, they did not know. Agro rushed through the woods behind them, not sure in which direction they'd went, but determined to find them. Soon the girls could hear the beating of horses' hoofs behind them. They looked at each other with wide eyes as they ran. Should we hide? Shiloh mouthed to her companion. Nimshi responded with a look of panic and question. The sound grew closer, and they could hear branches breaking. How had he managed to catch up with them so quickly? The girls stopped, their chests heaving, and looked for a place to hide. They spotted a hollowed-out tree, and Nimshi directed Shiloh in first. Nimshi attempted to come in beside her, but she couldn't fit. As the girls tried in panic to fit both of them inside the tree, Nimshi's father broke through the brush. "Nimshi!" he called, his voice full of anger. "What are you doing?" Nimshi mouthed to Shiloh for her to stay down and turned to her father. He rode up beside her and swung off his steed. "What are you doing out here?" he asked her harshly, grabbing her by the arm. He pushed up her sleeves, observing her scars. "When was the last time you marked yourself?" "A few days ago, father." "Don't you usually do so every day?" "Yes, father, but I just haven't." "Why?" Sorry. "Why not?" He pushed down her sleeves and released her. "I haven't felt like it." "The boys say that the girl has been filling your head with stories about a deity and of false ways. Is this true?" He looked her in the eyes. "No, father." Nimshi's voice shook, and she looked away from his stare. "Are you lying?" He grabbed her by the arm again. "No, father. They're not stories, and they aren't false." Tears began dripping down her cheeks. "I believe them, father." Her father pulled her closer to him and put one of his large hands on her face, forcing her to look at him. "You know how you've been taught, Nimshi. Why do you listen to these stories?" "Because they make me feel at peace, father. They don't cause me pain." "Life is pain, daughter. There is no escape from it." "Yes, there is, father, and I found one." "Your mother said the same, but all it did was lead her to delusion." "Why did you kill her, father? How could you do that?" "All she did was find something she thought was better about life, and I know now that she must have believed what I do. She was right, father. She was right, and you killed her for it." "Silence! You will not talk to me that way!" He slapped her cheek. "Your mother was a lunatic, and it was better for her to die as one than to live as one. Do you want the same for yourself? Do you want to die for these stories, Nimshi?" "No, father," Nimshi cried. "I want to live." Shiloh remained inside the tree, shaking with fear and anger. She didn't want to remain in hiding, but she didn't know what to do. She was afraid. Tears dripped down her pale cheeks as she listened to Nimshi's cries. "If you want to live, then come home and never speak of these stories again. Live as I have showed you." "No, father, I won't. The way you live isn't right, and it causes so much pain. I don't want to live that way anymore." Agro pulled his dagger from his belt and held it against his daughter's throat with firm hands. His eyes burned as he looked down at her. "Nimshi, listen to me. You're believing lies." "No, you are," Nimshi responded, her voice quieter now. She felt the knife being pressed harder and harder to the throat. "You truly believe these stories, Nimshi?" Are you prepared to die with them as your mother did? I will not have anyone in my family living to follow fairy tales. It profits nothing. You're wrong, father, Nimshi cried. You are so wrong, and I'm sorry. If you must do this, do it quickly. She closed her eyes tightly. If you kill me now, I will be happy at last. I see you are too far gone, daughter. It's a shame that my only girl has met the same fate as her mother. Shiloh's heart raced and she wanted with all her heart to leap out of the tree and save Nimshi, but she knew it would do no good. However, she tried anyway. Stop, please! Shiloh pulled herself out of the tree. Leave her alone! Agro looked at her with fierce eyes. It's your fault, girl, that I must do this. Stay back, unless you want the same. Please, she's done nothing wrong. She's your daughter. How can you do this? Child, you know nothing of this world. Do not speak as if you know more than I do. Shiloh, go, please, Nimshi said with desperate eyes, the knife still pressed to her neck. I'll be okay. I'll be happy. Go. Shiloh felt tears welling in her eyes. She didn't move. She was too scared to go forward and too determined to leave. The gratifier can help you too. Please, if you would just listen. Shut up! One more word and I'll kill you too. There's no saving her. Either leave or die with her. It'd be my pleasure to rid the world of more lunatics. Shiloh closed her mouth and knelt to the ground. She sobbed and prayed silently, asking the gratifier to help her and to help Nimshi. One last chance, daughter. Do you believe these stories you've been told? Do you wish to die by them? Nimshi's voice shook. Yes, father, I do. I believe them. I'm not scared of death. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke. Agro took a breath and clenched his jaw. I will miss you, Nimshi. It's a shame you were so easily deceived. With one swift motion, he cut across his daughter's throat and let her fall. Shiloh looked up from her position in shock. No, she breathed. No! How could you? She watched as Nimshi's father turned, not looking back at his daughter as she bled on the ground, her eyes wide as she choked for breath. He mounted his horse and rode away. Shiloh ran to her friend's side. Nimshi, she cried. Oh, Nimshi, I'm so sorry. She placed the girl's head in her lap, not caring that her friend's blood was drenching her dress. Nimshi looked at her with wide eyes, and with great strain she raised her hand towards her chest and placed it over Shiloh's as a sign of comfort. She closed her eyes, and Shiloh could see that she was waiting for her death. She looked at peace. Shiloh held her friend, unable to take in all of what had just occurred. Had her prayers not worked? Why was Nimshi lying in her arms as she was, and why was she still alive? She watched through watery eyes as the life seemed to leave Nimshi's body. Then, to her surprise, a light shone out of nowhere, glittering around Nimshi. Within the light appeared the friend she had known, upright and alive. She was dressed in a short-sleeved dress that flowed in the form of what appeared to be white silk, but depending on how Nimshi turned, it appeared to be several beautiful shades of every color one could imagine. The hazy image turned and smiled at her, waving happily. As it waved, Shiloh could see that the scars had disappeared from Nimshi's arms. She looked so peaceful, so happy. Shiloh smiled as tears dripped from her eyes. The gratifier had hurt her. Nimshi was happy now. She had died for the faith that Shiloh had shared with her. The image turned again and headed up a golden path, heading further and further away until the light seemed to swallow her. The light vanished, and as Shiloh looked upon the girl in her lap, she could see that Nimshi was no longer there, but she was away someplace great, as her grandmother had said. Shiloh heard footsteps coming through the woods, and she looked up to see Addiston, who was covered in blood, his eyes wide. He saw the girls and ran to Shiloh. No, he fell to his knees, breathless. I was too late. He ran his hands over his hair. Nimshi, I can't believe He began to sob as he looked at his sister. I tried to help, but Shiloh began. No, it's not your fault. I don't blame you. I blame my father. But now he is not here to blame. Shiloh looked at him with shock. You mean... She looked at the blood upon him. No, I didn't. I found him. His head was open on a rock, and his horse was gone. They must have thrown him. I can't say it's a tragedy, but he was my father. I moved him and put him into the river that was close by. I figured that was the best thing to do. He's long gone now. And so is she. He looked at his sister with affection and began to sob. Shiloh blinked at her own tears. I'm sorry, but she's okay. Addiston looked up at her. How can you say that? She's dead. I know, and it's a terrible thing, but I saw her, and she's happy now. She's with the Creator and the Gratifier. I don't know if you believe me, but I tell you, she is. She's finally happy as she wanted to be. Her scars are gone. Addiston nodded as he listened. I don't know about all the things you speak, but if they died for it, it must be worth something. Shiloh smiled slyly. It is. I can tell you someday if you'd like, and your brothers. Please do. Come back and stay with us. We need a girl around the house. He smiled a bit and then continued solemnly. I don't know what will become of Akar, but I will do my best to take care of he and little Aunt Raphael. Our father is gone now, so I have to. I did it for them, and I do it for my mother. I was the only one who truly knew her. The rest were all too young. Shiloh nodded. I will come back. I have nowhere else to go. I was sent here. I belong here. The two of them worked together to bury Nimshi there in the woods, crying as they did. Though they felt she was at peace, they grieved. Shiloh gathered wildflowers and placed them on the grave once it was complete. The two stepped back and spoke their respects. She is at peace now, Shiloh said as she saw the grief on Addiston's face. Addiston nodded. And someday, I hope we all can be too. They walked back to the house together in quiet.